Uh, I I I was going to do that while reading. Also, for some reason, um, no, they were working a second ago. Okay, uh, no, not yet. Oh, this is so scuffed.
Don't put me on. Don't put me on. Don't put me on.
Oh, okay, 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 no, you can't be heard. um, honey, could you post the, is live in other servers? You're not live yet. You're not live yet. Could you do the self-promo post in other servers for me, honey? You want to? You busy playing tanks? Oh yeah, you're painting. Okay, I'll do it. Mm-hmm. Okay. Um, my okay, I don't know what's going on. Like the Discord reactive things are not functioning at the moment. Yeah. Just tell me when you're all okay being heard, so I will unmute. But hello, chat. This is this is extreme. This is so scuff. Like the taters just won't appear. Like okay, like it was working. It was working right before I started stream. I swear. Like let me just. Yeah, I guess some help would be nice. Is everybody ready to be heard? Matsu, you ready to be heard? Okay, chat can now hear us. All of us, not just me. Yeah, tech
Yeah, someone forgot.
issues.
Someone forgot to put the taters in the pot.
Taters in the pot. Take the
Taters in the pot.
Okay. So choices. It should be
Double click guest 4.
the correct thing. Yes.
The URL.
Okay, okay. No, no, I can. Wait here. Okay. Wait. No, it's usually. Okay, 1 second. Let me try and fix this by maybe it's because I did that, and if I go.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, there we are.
I figured it out.
So
I'm
you
a
did the equivalent of
genius.
basically plugging and unplugging.
Yes, I plugged this in and
Oh
unplugged
my.
this. It
Did you
worked.
plug the potatoes in?
You need to unplug and replug in the potatoes, the potats.
The potatoes are plugged in. The potatoes.
The
What?
potats, buds.
The
Honey, your mic
potatoes,
is
I said.
muted. I can't hear you.
Double checking some things. Oh my goodness gracious.
Okay. Okay. Wait. You okay? What chapter are we picking up on? Chapter
21.
21. Hello, everyone. Today has been full of scuff, but we are reading
Hello,
Dracula.
hello, hello.
We are nearing the end, and we will be picking up with chapter 21 today.
21.
Mm-hmm.
21. What does that mean?
It means it's mostly gonna be, waste reading, because this is mostly Dr. Seward's diary.
Welcome.
Well, this chapter it's all me, but
Seward
the
is
next chapter,
such a talky person.
the next chapter it's all Ike actually.
Oh
Aw.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wonder if there's any more. I know.
Good news, I'm not dead.
Yeah. And I don't
So
think I have a part again until like the end.
I have like I've got a one part. I got my parts are towards the end.
Yeah. I know
Yes.
like I get like the final words and everything, I'm pretty sure.
Should waste tonight
Act-
like just get a room together or something so we can just leave them be for this.
Nah.
I need to be here. I need
The
to be
dead
reading.
silence from Isak.
I
I
I
need
don't
to be
know.
reading most of this.
Sorry.
My goodness.
I'm sorry.
No, it's alright.
Keep laughing.
I mean, frankly, I could make an image with two pots and have me and Ike have our own pot where everyone else is in another pot. But we're all reading this together, so let's just share the pot.
Uh-oh.
Shall we?
I think Mats is
can't
losing
breathe.
his mind.
Can't breathe. Stop. I'm trying to stop laughing.
It's
Deep
funny
breaths.
because
Deep
me and
breaths,
Ike are a
librarian.
couple. Okay.
Oh, it's hard to breathe. Chest hurts.
You can do it.
Okay.
You can do it.
God, give
It's
me
fine.
a second.
Okay.
Man, it's been a while since I've heard a laughing fit like this.
Yeah,
It's frankly entertaining.
I'm still trying to figure out what Matsu's laughing over, actually.
I think it's
still don't know.
it's just the two pots thing. I think that's it.
I didn't find it that funny, but
Let me
okay.
think for a second. So I know it was something else. It was something else. It was something else. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. I think I'm going to stop.
Alright. Waste, whenever you're ready, you can take away the stream and
Oh,
start
are
us
you sure
off.
we didn't
But
want
wait,
a recap of everything that's happened so far from our very special recap professional?
yes. Can you give us the recap? Recap professional Aikasui?
I went on vacation to a castle, almost died. Dracula went to a boat on London. The boat, everyone on the boat died. Yeah, it's just been a lot of death, actually.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Lore died twice.
Rip.
Mina Harker. Not Mina Harker. Lucy Westengraw. She got turned into a vampire and then we
Oh
killed her
yeah,
again.
Mina Harker, Issa and I got married.
Yep.
Yeah, that's it. I don't remember.
And in slightly more recent chapters, they succeeded in purging some of Dracula's stores of soil from his homeland, so he had fewer resting places to rely upon. And also, like, all came together and said, yes, there will be no secrets between any of us, except Mina. She's no longer part of this.
Yeah, the boys have decided that because I am a delicate woman, I can't handle information.
Oh yeah, and Mina's currently being preyed upon by Dracula.
Mm-hmm. That's
Mhm.
correct.
And the only reason that's happening is because I wasn't allowed, because Mina Hoiko was not allowed to know the information of the boyfriend squad, even though Mina is one of the most competent members of the group.
Like, literally already proved herself, and then it's like, yes, you are fantastic. But because you are a woman, we're sorry.
mean-
From here on, you are excluded.
I mean, Jonathan's reasoning for it is like, oh, this is my wife, I want to protect her from this. Like, that's the solid reasoning, but the others are like,
Oh, yeah, that's
it's a
Jonathan's
woman.
reason.
It's a woman, we can't let her have this information, we don't know if that will help her or not. Probably will just make her frantic.
To be fair, is part of like the whole dramatic shift that we're going to see here.
Mhm.
It's still faulty reasoning, but
Mhm.
nevertheless. The one fault of the boyfriend squad is the prejudices of the time.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, absolutely, it was acceptable at the time. Firefly, yeah, like that was just that back then. That was just like common sense, quote unquote.
It was the most
Nowadays,
common of senses.
yeah, nowadays you look at it and it's just like, what the hell are you doing? That's dumb. That's dumb logic. Stop it. And a slight recap towards like the end of the last chapter that we read, just to catch everyone up. There was a commotion in the insane asylum, and Renfield has apparently been found in a pool of blood.
Hmm.
And so Seward was summoned by his assistants to check it out. And of course, he's going to go take a look, and that is where we pick up.
Now, take it away.
Chapter 21 Dr. Seward's Diary, 3rd of October. Let me put down with exactness all that happened, as well as I can remember it, since last I made an entry. Not a detail that I can recall must be forgotten. In all calmness, I must proceed. When I came to Renfield's room, I found him lying on the floor on his left side in a glittering pool of blood. When I went to move him, it became at once apparent that he had received some terrible injuries. There seemed none of the unity of purpose between the parts of the body which makes even lethargic sanity. As the face was exposed, I could see that it was horribly bruised, as though it had been beaten against the floor. Indeed, it was from the face wounds that the pool of blood originated. The attendant who was kneeling beside the body said to me as we turned him over, I think, sir, his back is broken. See, both his right arms and leg and the whole side of his face are paralyzed. How such a thing could have happened puzzled the attendant beyond measure. He seemed quite bewildered, and his brows were gathered in as he said, I can't understand the two things. He could mark his face like that by beating his own head on the ground. I saw a young woman do it once at the Eversfield Asylum before anyone could lay hands on her. And I suppose he might have broken his back by falling out of bed, if he got in an awkward kink. But for the life of me, I can't imagine how the two things occurred. If his back was broke, he couldn't beat his head, and if his face was like that before the fall out of bed, there would be marks of it. I said to him, Go to Dr. Van Helsing and ask him to kindly come here at once. I want him without an instant's delay. The man ran off, and within a very few minutes the professor, in his dressing gown and slippers, appeared. When he saw Renfield on the ground, he looked keenly at him a moment and then turned to me. I think he recognized my thought in my eyes, for he said very quietly, manifestly for the ears of the attendant, Ah, a sad accident. He will need very careful watching and much attention. I shall stay with you myself, but I shall first dress myself. If you will remain, I shall in a few minutes join you. The patient was now breathing stertorously, and it was easy to see that he had suffered some terrible injury. Van Helsing returned with extraordinary celerity, bearing with him a surgical case. He had evidently been thinking and had his mind made up, for almost before he looked at the patient, he whispered to me, Send the attendant away. We must be alone with him when he becomes conscious after the operation. So I said, I think that will do now, Simmons. We have done all that we can at present. You had better go your round, and Dr. Van Helsing will operate. Let me know instantly if there be anything unusual anywhere. The man withdrew, and we went into a strict examination of the patient. The wounds of the face were superficial. The real injury was a depressed fracture of the skull, extending right up through the motor area. The professor thought a moment and said, We must reduce the pressure and get back to normal conditions as far as can be. The rapidity of the suffusion shows the terrible nature of his injury. The whole motor area seems affected. The suffusion of the brain will increase quickly, so we must intervene at once or it may be too late. As he was speaking, there was a soft tapping at the door. I went over and opened it and found in the corridor without Arthur and Quincy in pajamas and slippers. The former spoke. I heard your man call upon Dr. Van Helsing and tell him of an accident. So I woke Quincy, or rather called for him as he was not asleep. Things are moving too quickly and too strangely for sound sleep for any of us these times. I've been thinking that tomorrow night we'll not see things as they have been. We'll have to look back and forward a little more than we have done. May we come in? I nodded and held the door open until they had entered. Then I closed it again. When Quincy saw the attitude and state of the patient and noted the horrible pool on the floor, he said softly, My God, what has happened to him? Poor devil. I told him briefly and attended that we expected he would recover consciousness after the operation, for a short time at all events. He went at once and sat down on the edge of the bed, with Godalming beside him. We all watched in patience. We shall wait, said Van Helsing, just long enough to fix the best spot for terfining, so that we may most quickly and perfectly remove the blood clot, for it is evident that the hemorrhage is increasing. The minutes during which we waited passed with fearful slowness. I had a horrible sinking in my heart, and from Van Helsing's face I gathered that he felt some fear or apprehension as to what was to come. I dreaded the words that Renfield might speak. I was positively afraid to think, but the conviction of what was coming was on me, as I have read of men who have heard the death watch. The poor man's breathing came in uncertain gasps. Each instant he seemed as though he would open his eyes and speak, but then would follow a prolonged, stertorous breath, and he would relapse into a more fixed insensibility. Inured as I was to sickbeds and death, this suspense grew and grew upon me. I could almost hear the beating of my own heart, and the blood surging through my temples sounded like blows from a hammer. The silence finally became agonizing. I looked at my companions one after another, and saw from their flushed faces and damp brows that they were enduring equal torture. There was a nervous suspense over us all, as though overhead some dread bell would peal out powerfully when we should least expect it. At last there came a time when it was evident that the patient was sinking fast. He might die at any moment. I looked up at the professor and caught his eyes fixed on mine. His face was sternly set as he spoke. There is no time to lose. His words may be worth many lives. I have been thinking so, as I stood here. It may be there is a soul at stake. We shall operate just above the ear. Without another word, he made the operation. For a few moments the breathing continued to be stertorous. Then there came a breath so prolonged that it seemed as though it would tear open his chest. Suddenly his eyes opened and became fixed on in a wild, helpless stare. This was continued for a few moments. Then it was softened into a glad surprise, and from the lips came a sigh of relief. He moved convulsively as he did so, said, I'll be quiet, Doctor. Tell them to take off the strait waistcoat. I have had a terrible dream, and it has left me so weak that I cannot move. What's wrong with my face? It feels all swollen, and it smarts dreadfully. He tried to turn his head, but even with the effort, his eyes seemed to grow glassy again, so I gently put it back. Then Van Helsing said in a quiet, grave tone, Tell us your dream, Mr. Renfield. As he heard the voice, his face brightened through its mutilation, and he said, That is Dr. Van Helsing. How good it is of you to be here. Give me some water, my lips are dry, and I shall try to tell you. I dreamed... He stopped and seemed fainting. I called quietly to Quincy. The brandy, it is in my study, quick. He flew and returned with a glass, the decanter of brandy, and a carafe of water. We moistened the parched lips, and the patient quickly revived. It seemed, however, that his poor injured brain had been working in the interval, for when he was quite conscious he looked at me piercingly with an agonized confusion, which I shall never forget, and said, "I must not deceive myself. It was no dream, but all a grim reality." Then his eyes roved round the room, and they caught sight of the two figures sitting patiently on the edge of the bed. He went on, "If I were not sure already, I should know from them." For an instant his eyes closed, not with pain or sleep, but voluntarily, as though he were bringing all his faculties to bear. When he opened them, he said, hurriedly, and with more energy than he had yet displayed, "Quick, doctor, quick! I am dying. I feel that I have but a few minutes, and that I must go back to death, or worse. Wet my lips with brandy again. I have something that I must say before I die, or before my poor crushed brain dies anyhow. Thank you. It was that night after you left me, when I implored you to let me go away. I couldn't speak then, for I felt my tongue was tied, but I was as sane then, except in that way, as I am now. I was in an agony of despair for a long time after you left me. It seemed hours. Then there came a sudden peace to me. My brain seemed to become cool again, and I realized where I was. I heard the dogs bark behind our house, but not where he was." As he spoke, Van Helsing's eyes never blinked, but his hand came out and met mine and gripped it hard. He did not, however, betray himself. He nodded slightly and said, "Go on," in a low voice. Renfield proceeded. "He came up to the window in the mist, as I had seen him often before, but he was solid then, not a ghost, and his eyes were fierce like a man's when angry. He was laughing with his red mouth. The sharp white teeth glinted in the moonlight when he turned to look back over the belt of trees to where the dogs were barking. I wouldn't ask him to come in at first, though I knew he wanted to, just as he had wanted all along. Then he began promising me things, not in words, but by doing them." He was interrupted by a word from the professor. "How?" "By making them happen, just as he used to send in the flies when the sun was shining. Great big fat ones with steel and sapphire on their wings, and big moths in the night with skull and crossbones on their backs." Van Helsing nodded to him as he whispered to me unconsciously, "The Acherentia atropos of the Sphinx, what you call the death's head moth." The patient went on without stopping. "Then he began to whisper, 'Rats, rats, rats, hundreds, thousands, millions of them, and every one a life, and dogs to eat them, and cats too, all lives, all red blood with years of life in it, and not merely buzzing flies.' I laughed at him, for I wanted to see what he could do. Then the dogs howled, away beyond the dark trees in his house. He beckoned me to the window. I got up and looked out, and he raised his hands and seemed to call out without using any words. A dark mass spread over the grass, coming on like the shape of a flame of fire. And then he moved the mist to the right and left, and I could see that there were thousands of rats with their eyes blazing red, like his, only smaller. He held up his hand, and they all stopped, and I thought he seemed to be saying, 'All these lives will I give you, aye, and many more and greater, through countless ages, if you will fall down and worship me.' And then a red cloud like the color of blood seemed to close over my eyes, and before I knew what I was doing, I found myself opening the sash and saying to him, 'Come in, lord and master.' The rats were all gone, but he slid into the room through the sash, though it was only open an inch wide, just as the moon herself has often come in through the tiniest crack, and has before me in all her size and splendor." His voice was weaker, so I moistened his lips with the brandy again, and he continued, but it seemed as though his memory had gone on working in the interval, for his story was farther advanced. I was about to call him back to the point, but Van Helsing whispered to me, "Let him go on. Do not interrupt him. He cannot go back, and maybe could not proceed at all if once he lost the thread of his thought. He proceeded. All day I waited to hear from him, but he did not send me anything, not even a blowfly, and when the moon got up I was pretty angry with him. When he slid in through the window, though it was shut, and did not even knock, I got mad with him. He sneered at me, and his white face looked out of the mist with his red eyes gleaming, and he went on as though he owned the whole place, and I was no one. He didn't even smell the same as he went by me. I couldn't hold him. I thought that somehow Mrs. Harker had come into the room. The two men sitting on the bed stood up and came over, standing behind me so that he could not see them, but where they could hear better. They were both silent, but the professor started and quivered. His face, however, grew grimmer and sterner still. Renfield went on without noticing. When Mrs. Harker came in to see me this afternoon, she wasn't the same. It was like tea after the teapot had been watered. Here we all moved, but no one said a word. He went on. I didn't know that she was here till she spoke, and she didn't look the same. I don't care for the pale people. I like them with lots of blood in them, and hers had all seemed to have run out. I didn't think of it at the time, but when she went away I began to think, and it made me mad to know that he had been taking the life out of her. I could feel that the rest quivered as I did, but we remained otherwise still. So when he came tonight, I was ready for him. I saw the mist stealing in, and I grabbed it tight. I had heard that madmen have a natural strength, and as I knew I was a madman, at times anyhow, I resolved to use my power. Aye, and he felt it too, for he had to come out of the mist to struggle with me. I held tight and I thought I was going to win, for I didn't mean him to take any more of her life till I saw his eyes. They burned into me and my strength became like water. He slipped through it, and when I tried to cling to him, he raised me up and flung me down. There was a red cloud before me and a noise like thunder, and the mist seemed to steal away under the door. His voice was becoming fainter and his breath more strenuous. Van Helsing stood up instinctively. We know the worst now, he said. He is here, and we know his purpose. It may not be too late. Let us be armed, the same as we were the other night, but lose no time. There is not an instant to spare. There was no need to put out fear, nay, our conviction, into words. We shared them in common. We all hurried and took from our rooms the same things that we had when we entered the Count's house. The professor had his ready, and as we met in the corridor, he pointed to them significantly as he said, They never leave me, and they shall not till this unhappy business is over. Be wise also, my friends. It is no common enemy that we deal with. Alas, alas, that the dear Madam Mina should suffer. He stopped. His voice was breaking, and I do not know if rage or terror predominated in my own heart. Outside the Harker's door we paused. Art and Quincy held back, and the latter said, Should we disturb her? We must, said Van Helsing grimly. If the door be locked, I shall break it in. May it not frighten her terribly? It is unusual to break into a lady's room. Van Helsing said solemnly, You are always right, but this is life and death. All chambers are alike to the doctor, and even were they not, they are all as one to me tonight. Friend John, when I turn the handle, if the door does not open, do you put your shoulder down and shove, and you too, my friends. Now! He turned the handle as he spoke, but the door did not yield. We threw ourselves against it. With a crash it burst open, and we almost fell headlong into the room. The professor did actually fall, and I saw cross him as he gathered himself up from hands and knees. What I saw appalled me. I felt my hair rise like bristles on the back of my neck, and my heart seemed to stand still. The moonlight was so bright that through the thick yellow blind the room was light enough to see. On the bed beside the window lay Jonathan Harker, his face flushed and breathing heavily as though in a stupor. Kneeling on the near edge of the bed, facing outwards, was the white-clad figure of his wife. by her side stood a tall, thin man clad in black. His face was turned from us, but the instant we saw it, we all recognized the Count. In every way, even to the scar on his forehead. With his left hand, he held both Mrs. Harker's hands, keeping them away with her arms at full tension. His right hand gripped her by the back of the neck, forcing her face down on his bosom. Her white nightdress was smeared with blood, and a thin stream trickled down the man's bare breast, which was shown by his torn-open dress. The attitude of the two had a terrible resemblance to a child forcing a kitten's nose into a saucer of milk to compel it to drink. As we burst into the room, the Count turned his face, and the hellish look that I had heard described seemed to leap into it. His eyes flamed red with devilish passion. The great nostrils of the white, aquiline nose opened wide and quivered at the edges, and the white, sharp teeth behind the full lips of the blood-dripping mouth champed together like those of a wild beast. With a wrench which threw his victim back upon the bed as though hurled from a height, he turned and sprang at us. But by this time the professor had gained his feet and was holding towards him the envelope which contained the sacred wafer. The Count suddenly stopped just as poor Lucy had done outside the tomb, and cowered back. Further and further back he cowered as we, lifting our crucifixes, advanced. The moonlight suddenly failed as a great black cloud sailed across the sky. And when the gaslight sprang up under Quincy's match, we saw nothing but a faint vapor. This, as we looked, trailed under the door, which was the recoil from its bursting open had swung back to its old position. Van Helsing, Art, and I moved forward to Mrs. Harker, who by this time had drawn her breath, and with it had given a scream so wild, so ear-piercing, so despairing, that it seems to me now that it will ring in my ears till my dying days. For a few seconds she lay in her helpless attitude and disarray. Her face was ghastly, with a pallor which was accentuated by the blood which smeared her lips and cheeks and chin. From her throat trickled a thin stream of blood. Her eyes were mad with terror. Then she put before her face her poor crushed hands, which bore on their whiteness the red mark of the Count's terrible grip, and from behind them came a low, desolate wail which made the terrible scream seem only the quick expression of an endless grief. Van Helsing stepped forward and drew the coverlet gently over her body, whilst Art, after looking at her face for an instant despairingly, ran out of the room. Van Helsing whispered to me, "Jonathan is in a stupor such as we know the vampire can produce. We can do nothing with poor Madam Mina for a few moments till she recovers herself. I must wake him." He dipped the end of a towel in cold water and with it began to flick him on the face. His wife all the while holding her face between her hands and sobbing in a way that was heartbreaking to hear. I raised the blind and looked out of the window. There was much moonshine, and as I looked I could see Quincy Morris run across the lawn and hide himself in the shadow of a great yew tree. It puzzled me to think why he was doing this, but at the instant I heard Harker's quick exclamation as he woke to partial consciousness and turned to the bed. On his face, as there might well be, was a look of wild amazement. He seemed dazed for a few seconds, and then full consciousness seemed to burst upon him all at once, and he started up. His wife was aroused by the quick movement, and turned to him with her arms stretched out, as though to embrace him. Instantly, however, she drew them in again, and pulled her elbows together, held her hands before her face, and shuddered till the bed beneath her shook. "In God's name, what does this mean?" Harker cried out. "Dr. Seward, Dr. Van Helsing, what is it? What has happened? What is wrong? Mina, dear, what is it? What does that blood mean? My God, has it come to this?" And raising himself to his knees, he beat his hands wildly together. "Good God, help us! Help her! Oh, help her!" With a quick movement, he jumped from bed and began to pull on his clothes, all the man in him awake and at the need for instant exertion. "What has happened? Tell me all about it," he cried without pausing. "Dr. Van Helsing, you love Mina, I know. Oh, do something to save her. It cannot have gone too far yet. Guard her while I look for him." His wife, through her terror and horror and distress, saw some sure danger to him. Instantly forgetting her own grief, she seized hold of him and cried out, "No, no, Jonathan, you must not leave me. I have suffered enough tonight, God knows, without the dread of his harming you. You must stay with me. Stay with these friends who will watch over you." Her expression became frantic as she spoke, and as he yielded to her, she pulled him down sitting on the bedside and clung to him fiercely. Van Helsing and I tried to calm them both. The professor held up his little golden crucifix and said, with wonderful calmness, "Do not fear, my dear, we are here. And whilst this is close to you, no foul thing can approach. You are safe for tonight, and we must be calm and take counsel together." She shuddered and was silent, holding down her head on her husband's breast. When she raised it, his white night robe was stained with blood where her lips had touched, and where the thin open wound in the neck had sent forth drops. The instant she saw it, she drew back with a low wail and whispered amidst choking sobs, "Unclean, unclean! I must touch him or kiss him no more. Oh, that it should be that it is I who am now his worst enemy, and whom he may have most cause to fear." To this he spoke out resolutely, "Nonsense, Mina. It is a shame to me to hear such a word. I would not hear it of you, and I shall not hear it from you. May God judge be my, God judge me by my deserts, and punish me with more bitter suffering than even this hour, if by any act or will of mine anything ever come between us." He put out his arms and folded her to his breast, and for a while she lay there sobbing. He looked at us over her bowed head with eyes that blinked damply above his quivering nostrils. His mouth was set as steel. After a while, her sobs became less frequent and more faint, and then he said to me, speaking with a studied calmness which I felt tried his nervous power to the utmost, "And now, Dr. Seward, tell me all about it. Too well I know the broad fact. Tell me all that has been." I told him exactly what had happened, and he listened with seeming impassiveness. But his nostrils twitched and his eyes blazed as I told how the ruthless hand of the Count had. Oh, I read that in the wrong voice. Oh well. Ruthless hands of the Count had held his wife in that terrible and horrid position, with her mouth to the open wound in his breast. It interested me, even at that moment, to see that whilst the face of white set passion worked convulsively over the bowed head, the hands tenderly and lovingly stroked the ruffled hair. Just as I had finished, Quincy and Godalming knocked at the door. They entered in obedience to our summons. Van Helsing looked at me questioningly. I understood him to mean if we were to take advantage of their coming to divert, if possible, the thoughts of the unhappy husband and wife from each other and from themselves. So on my nodding acquiescence to him, he asked them what they had seen or done, to which Lord Godalming answered, "I could not see him anywhere in the passage or in any of our rooms. I looked in the study, but though he had been there, he had gone. He had, however—" He stopped suddenly, looking at the poor drooping figure on the bed. Van Helsing said gravely, "Go on, friend Arthur. We want no more concealments. Our hope now is in knowing all. Tell freely." So Art went on. "He had been there, and though it could only have been for a few seconds, he made rare hay of the place. All the manuscripts had been burned, and the blue flames were flickering amongst the white ashes. The cylinders of your phonograph, too, were thrown on the fire, and the wax had helped the flames." Here I interrupted. "Thank God there is the other copy in the safe." His face lit for a moment, but fell again as he went on. "I ran downstairs then, but could not see no sign of him. I looked into Renfield's room, but there was no trace there except—" Again he paused. "Go on," said Harker hoarsely. So he bowed his head and, moistening his lips with his tongue, added, "Except that the poor fellow is dead." Mrs. Harker raised her head, looking from one to the other of us, as she said solemnly, "God's will be done." I could not but feel that Art was keeping back something, but as I took it that it was with a purpose, I said nothing. Van Helsing turned to Morris and asked, "Are you, friend Quincy, and you, friend Quincy, have you any to tell?" "A little," he answered. "It may be much eventually, but at present I can't say. I thought it well to know, if possible, where the Count would go when he left the house. I did not see him, but I saw a bat rise from Renfield's window and flapped westward. I expected to see him in some shape go back to Carfax, but he evidently sought some other lair. He will not be back tonight, for the sky is reddening in the east, and the dawn is close. We must work tomorrow." He said the latter words through his shut teeth. For a space of perhaps a couple of minutes there was silence, and I could fancy that I could hear the sound of our hearts beating. Then Van Helsing said, placing his hand very tenderly on Mrs. Harker's head, "And now, Madam Mina, poor dear Madam Mina, tell us exactly what happened. God knows that I do not want that you be pained, but it is need that we know all, for now more than ever has all work to be done quick and sharp, and in deadly earnest. The day is close to us that must end all, if it may be so, and now is the chance that we may live and learn." The poor dear lady shivered, and I could see the tension of her nerves as she clasped her husband closer to her, and bent her head lower and lower still on his breast. Then she raised her head proudly and held out one hand to Van Helsing, who took it in his, and after stooping and kissing it reverently, held it fast. The other hand was locked in that of her husband, who held his other arm thrown round her protectively. After a pause in which she was evidently ordering her thoughts, she began. "I took the sleeping draught which you had so kindly given me, but for a long time it did not act. I seemed to become more wakeful, and myriads of horrible fancies began to crowd in upon my mind, all of them connected with death and vampires, with blood and pain and trouble." Her husband involuntarily groaned as she turned to him and said lovingly, "Do not fret, dear, you must be brave and strong, and help me through the horrible task. If you only knew what an effort it is to me to tell of this fearful thing at all, you would understand how much I need your help. Well, I saw I must try to help the medicine do its work with my will, if it was to do me any good, so I resolutely set myself to sleep. Sure enough, sleep must soon have come to me, for I remember no more. Jonathan coming in had not waked me, for he lay by my side when next I remember. There was in the room the same thin white mist that I had before noticed, but but I forget now. If you know of this, you will find it in my diary, which I shall show you later. I felt the same vague terror which had come to me before, and the same sense of some presence. I turned to wake Jonathan, but found that he slept so soundly that it seemed as if it was he who had taken the sleeping draught and not I. I tried, but could not wake him. This caused me great fear, and I looked around terrified. Then indeed my heart sank within me. Beside the bed, as if he had stepped out of the mist, or rather as if the mist had turned into his figure, for it had entirely disappeared, stood a tall, thin man, all in black. I knew him at once from the description of the others. The waxen face, the high aquiline nose, on which the light fell in a thin white line, the parted red lips, with the sharp white teeth showing between, and the red eyes that I had seemed to see in the sunset on the windows of St. Mary's Church at Whitby. I knew, too, the red scar on his forehead where Jonathan had struck him. For an instant my heart stood still, and I would have screamed out, only that I was paralyzed. In the pause he spoke in a sort of keen, cutting whisper, pointing as he spoke to Jonathan. "Silence! If you make a sound, I shall take him and dash his brains out before your very eyes." I was appalled and was too bewildered to do or say anything. With a mocking smile, he placed one hand upon my shoulder and, holding me tight, bared my throat with the other, saying as he did so, "First, a little refreshment to reward my exertions. You may as well be quiet. It is not the first time, or the second, that your veins have appeased my thirst." I was bewildered, and strangely enough, I did not want to hinder him. I suppose it is a part of the horrible curse that this happens when his touch is on his victim. And oh my God, pity me. He placed his reeking lips upon my throat. Her husband groaned again. She clasped his hand harder and looked at him pityingly, as if he were the injured one, and went on. I felt my strength fading away, and I was in a half swoon. How long this horrible thing lasted, I know not, but it seemed that a long time must have passed before he took his foul, awful, sneering mouth away. I saw it drip with the fresh blood. The remembrance seemed for a while to overpower her, and she drooped and would have sunk down but for her husband's sustaining arm. With a great effort she recovered herself and went on. Then he spoke to me mockingly. And so you, like the others, would play your brains against mine. You would help these men to hunt me and frustrate me in my designs. You know now, and they know in part already, and will know in full before long, what it is to cross my path. They should have kept their energies for use closer to home, whilst they played wits against me who commanded nations, and intrigued for them, and fought for them hundreds of years before they were born. I was countermining them, and you, their best beloved one, are now to me flesh of my flesh, blood of my blood, kin of my kin, my bountiful winepress for a while, and shall be later on my companion and my helper. You shall be avenged in turn, for not one of them but shall be ministered to your one of them but shall minister to your needs. But as yet you are to be punished for what you have done. You have aided in thwarting me, now you shall come to my call. When my brain says come to you, you shall cross land or sea to do my bidding, and to that end, this. With that he pulled open his shirt, and with his long sharp nails opened a vein in his breast. When the blood began to spurt out, he took my hands in one of his, holding them tight, and with the other seized my neck and pressed my mouth to the wound, so that I must either suffocate or swallow some of the. Oh my God, what have I done? What have I done to deserve such a fate? I who have tried to walk in meekness and righteousness all my days. God pity me. Look down on a poor soul in worse than mortal peril, and in mercy pity those to whom she is dear. Then she began to rub her lips as though to cleanse them from pollution. As she was telling her terrible story, the eastern sky began to quicken, and everything became more and more clear. Harker was still and quiet, but over his face, as the awful narrative went on, came a gray look which deepened and deepened in the morning light, till when the first red streak of the coming dawn shot up, the flesh stood darkly out against the whitening hair. We have arranged that one of us is to stay within call of the unhappy pair till we can meet together and arrange about taking action. Of this I am sure. The sun rises today on no more miserable house in all the great round of its daily course.
My fears have been dissuaded. They do learn. Thank you, Renfield.
They can be taught.
I guess.
Very vivid imagery in this one.
Mm-hmm.
Very vivid.
It is the big twist as we head into the climax.
It was a
Yes.
good chapter. For sure, for sure.
It's kind of funny because I was actually discussing with someone just before the stream about the whole, drinking from the blood of Dracula sort of thing. I was actually having a discussion with someone about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I forgot that was referenced in this chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. This is
Because I
good.
don't know if it does come up a bit in other vampire media, but not a lot, I think.
Like,
We're gonna
honestly, like,
learn the significance of it later, right? Because I don't actually know
I
yet.
oh,
don't
honey,
remember.
the significant. You already know the significance.
Yeah, I think it was mentioned before, wasn't it?
And I've at least talked to you about this multiple times, honey. In order to turn someone else into a vampire, like a vampire spawn, after all,
Mhm.
a vampire
Yeah.
origin, you gotta make them drink your blood. It's why if like just being bitten by a vampire won't turn you into a vampire. Although some media does that, and that doesn't make
Yeah.
sense.
Well.
If that's
Yeah.
the
I think they.
case, oh,
Sorry.
it's
No.
like
No.
if
Go
that's
ahead.
the case, like every time a vampire bites someone, they become a
I
vampire.
thought it I thought it was an intent thing. You have to bite them with the intent of turning them into a thrall.
I think
No.
I think a lot of that is born also out of the fact that a lot of media just tries to speed up the process.
Mm-hmm.
Because
And
otherwise, then you have to come up with an excuse
yeah,
why.
and like that model would not make sense. Like, what if you accidentally like just like idly think about it? Would that activate it? Who knows? But like, I don't think a vampire system where just simply biting someone would turn them into a vampire, because that will limit your blood supply. It makes most sense when the way to turn someone into a vampire is to drink their blood and make them drink yours.
This ain't werewolves, where if you survive the encounter and the bite, you're turned.
Mm-hmm.
Even
Like
that is. Sorry.
like that's a like it's not werewolves.
Hmm. Well, the whole werewolf biting you and transferring the curse thing actually is an invention of Hollywood. Let's be honest, but still,
Mhm.
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
totally.
Also, Ike said something funny to me
Oh,
out of
really?
pocket during your reading. Wait, Ike, do you want to repeat what you said?
Not really, no. No, not really.
It was like during the as soon as like it started describing Dracula biting Nina, Ike was like, "You think she's got a biting kick after this?" And I just looked at him.
It's probably more likely she came away with a biting trauma.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
because
I think we can
listening to
agree on that.
the chapter, it doesn't seem like a really pleasant
it
situation.
it did not seem like it. That was
Yeah.
definitely something that's gonna make her like no biting ever.
I mean the point where, for me at least, the point where they were mentioning he's describing Dracula holding the back of her neck like a child holds the back of a kid next when is forcing the kid to drink from milk. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, this is not consensual type move, action. This is, yeah.
And yet,
Although in
so many interpretations try and give us that whole twist on, well, actually, Mina's in love with Dracula. I'm like,
Uh,
no,
no,
no.
no,
no.
No.
yeah, it's a big no with that one. Like, although like in a lot of vampire media, that's like, oh, the bite can be pleasant, but that's usually based off consent. Clearly, the reason
Yeah.
why this was
Yeah,
so
see,
horribly unpleasant was because Mina's a one man kind of woman.
And, doesn't really have a thing for undead vampires.
Mhm.
I wonder why.
Honestly, just the way of leaking lips.
Mm-hmm.
How bad do you think Dracula's breath smells?
I mean,
Oh,
considering his prey is just raw human blood, not great.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
And hygiene at the time was not as it is today.
like his breath smells like disgusting pennies.
And if not, like, just the rotten, dead versions of that. Like,
Yep,
it is no longer fresh.
nasty.
yes. Probably hasn't bathed in a while either.
My gosh, like imagine how disgusting his chest was when he cut it open.
Oh
Ugh.
god, no.
We
Do
should
I
probably
have
just
to
read.
imagine that?
We should just read the next chapter.
Yes, yes.
Let's move on from talking about how horrible Dracula's
Okay,
hygiene is.
fine.
Dracula's a dreamboat. No, he ain't.
People romanticizing Dracula. You are just wrong.
I mean, okay. I am not one of the okay, Castlevania, at least the animated series, Castlevania's Dracula is a dreamboat. I will at least admit
Oh,
to
no,
that.
yes.
But this Dracula, nah. Uh-uh.
Alright.
Nasty.
Chapter 22. Jonathan Harker's Journal. 3rd of October. As I must do something or go mad, I write this diary. It is now 6 o'clock, and we are to meet in the study in half an hour and take something to eat. For Dr. Van Helsing and Dr. Seward are agreed that if we do not eat, we cannot work our best. Our best will be, God knows, required today. I must keep writing at every chance, for I dare not stop to think. All, big and little, must go down. Perhaps at the end of the little things may teach us most. The teaching, big or little, could not have landed Mina or me anywhere worse than we are today. However, we must trust and hope. Poor Mina told me just now, with the tears running down her dear cheeks, that it is in trouble and trial that our faith is tested, that we must keep on trusting, and that God will aid us up to the end. The end, oh my God, what end? To work, to work. When Dr. Van Helsing and Dr. Seward had come back from seeing poor Renfield, we went gravely into what was to be done. First, Dr. Seward told us when he and Dr. Van Helsing had gone down to the room below, they had found Renfield lying on the floor, all in a heap. His face was all bruised and crushed in, and the bones of his neck were broken. Dr. Seward asked the attendant who was on duty in the passage if he had heard anything. He said that he had been sitting down. He confessed to half dozing, when he heard loud voices in the room, and then Renfield had called out loudly several times, God, God, God. After that there was a sound of falling, and when he entered the room he found him lying on the floor, face down, just as the doctors had seen him. Van Helsing asked if he had heard voices or a voice, and he said he could not say, that at first it had seemed to him as if there were two, but as there was no one in the room, it could have been only one. He could swear to it, if required, that the word God was spoken by the patient. Dr. Seward said to us when we were alone that he did not wish to go into the matter. The question of an inquest had to be considered, and it would never do to put forward the truth, as no one would believe it. As it was, he thought that on the attendant's evidence he could give a certificate of death by misadventure in falling from bed. In case the coroner should demand it, there would be a formal inquest, necessarily to the same result. When the question began to be discussed as to what should be our next step, the first thing we decided was that Mina should be in full confidence, that nothing of any sort, no matter how painful, should be kept from her. She herself agreed as to its wisdom, and it was pitiful to see her so brave and yet so sorrowful, and in such a depth of despair. There must be no concealment, she said. Alas, we have had too much already. And besides, there is nothing in all the world that can give me more pain than I have already endured, than I suffer now. What may happen, it must be of new hope or of new courage to me. Van Helsing was looking at her fixedly as she spoke, and said suddenly but quietly, "But dear Madame Mina, are you not afraid? Not for yourself, but for others from yourself, after what has happened?" Her face grew set in its lines, and her eyes shone with the devotion of a martyr as she answered, "Ah, no, for my mind is made up." "To what?" he asked gently, whilst we were all very still, for each in our own way we had a sort of vague idea of what she meant. Her answer came with a direct simplicity, as though she were simply stating a fact. "Because if I find in myself, and I shall watch keenly for it, a sign of harm to any that I love, I shall die." "You would not kill yourself?" he asked hoarsely. "I would, if there were no friend who loved me, who would save me such a pain, and so desperate an effort. She looked at him meaningly as she spoke. He was sitting down, but now he rose and came close to her and put his hand on her head as he said solemnly, "My child, there is such a one if it were for your good. For myself, I could hold it in my account with God to find such a euthanasia for you, even at this moment, if it were best. Nay, were it safe. But my child." For a moment he seemed choked, and a great sob rose in his throat. He gulped it down and went on. "There are here some who would stand between you and death. You must not die. You must not die by any hand, but least of all your own. Until the other, who has followed your sweet life, is true dead, you must not die. For if he is still with the quick undead, your death would make you even as he is. No, you must live. You must struggle and strive to live, through, though death would seem a boon unspeakable. You must fight death himself, though he come to you in pain or in joy, by the day or the night, in safety or in peril. On your living soul I charge you that you do not die, nay, nor think of death, till this great evil be past." The poor dear grew white as death, and shook and shivered as I have seen a quicksand shake and shiver at the incoming of the tide. We were all silent. We could do nothing. At length she grew more calm, and turning to him said, sweetly, but oh, so sorrowfully, as she held out her hand, "I promise you, my dear friend, that if God will let me live, I shall strive to do so, till, if it may be in his good time, this horror may have passed away from me." She was so good and brave that we all felt that our hearts were strengthened to work and endure for her, and we began to discuss what we were to do. I told her that she was to have all the papers in the safe, and all the papers or diaries and phonographs we might hereafter use, and was to keep the record as she had done before. She was pleased with the prospect of anything to do, if pleased could be used in connection with so grim an interest. As usual, Van Helsing had thought ahead of everyone else and was prepared with the exact ordering of our work. "It is perhaps well," he said, "that our meeting after our visit to Carfax, we decided not to do anything with the earth boxes that lay there. Had we done so, the Count must have guessed our purpose, and would doubtless have taken measures in advance to frustrate such an effort with regard to the others. But now he does not know our intentions. Nay, more, in all probability, he does not know that such a power exists to us as can sterilize his layers, so that he cannot use them as of old. We are now with so much further advanced in our knowledge as to their disposition that, when we have examined the house in Piccadilly, we may track the very last of them. Today, then, is ours, its and in it rests our hope. The sun that rose on our sorrow this morning guards us in its course until it sets tonight. That monster must retain whatever form he has now. He is confined within the limitations of his earthly envelope. He cannot melt into thin air, nor disappear through cracks, or chinks, or crannies. If he go through a doorway, he must open the door like a mortal. And so we have this day to hunt out all his lairs and sterilize them. So we shall, if we have not yet catch him and destroy him, drive him to bay in some place where the catching and destroying shall be in time, sure. Here I started up, for I could not contain myself at the thought that the minutes and seconds so preciously laden with Mina's life and happiness were flying from us, since whilst we talked action was impossible. But Van Helsing had held up his hand warningly. "Nay, friend Jonathan," he said, "in this, the quickest way home is the longest way, so your proverbs say. We shall all act, and act with desperate quick when the time has come. But think, in all the probable, the key of the situation is in that house in Piccadilly. The Count may have many houses which he has bought. Of them he will have deeds of purchase, keys, and other things. He will have paper that he wrote on. He will have his book of checks. There are many belongings that he must have somewhere. Why not in this place so central, so quiet, where he come and go by the front or the back at all hour? when in the very vast of the traffic there is none to notice. We shall go there and search that house, and when we learn what it holds, then we do what our friend Arthur call, in his phrases of hunt, stop the earths, and so we run down our old fox. So, is it not? Then let us come at once, I cried. We are wasting the precious, precious time. The professor did not move, but simply said, and how are we to get into that house in Piccadilly? Anyway, I cried, we shall break in if need be. And your police, where will they be, and what will they say? I was staggered, but I knew that if he wished to delay, he had a good reason for it. So I said as quietly as I could, don't wait more than need be. You know, I am sure, what torture I am in. Ah, my child, that I do. And indeed, there is no wish of me to add to your anguish. But just think, what can we do until all the world be at movement? Then will come our time. I have thought and thought, and seems to me that the simplest way is the best of all. Now, we wish to get into the house, but we have no key. Is it not so? I nodded. Now, suppose that you were, in truth, the owner of that house, and you could not still get it, and think there was to you no conscience of the housebreaker. What would you do? I should get a respectable locksmith and set him to the work to pick the lock for me. And your police, they would interfere, would they not? Oh, no, not if they knew the man was properly employed. Then he looked at me as keenly as he spoke. All that is in doubt is the consciousness of the employer, and the belief of your policeman as to whether or not that employer has a good conscience or a bad one. Your police must indeed be zealous men and clever, oh so clever, in reading the heart, that they trouble themselves in such a matter. No, no, my friend Jonathan, you go take the lock off 100 empty house in this your London, or of any city in the world, and if you do it as such things are rightly done, and at the time such thing wait, and at the time such things are rightly done, no one will interfere. I have read of a gentleman who owns so a fine house in London. When he went for months of summer to Switzerland and locked up his house, some burglar came and broke the window at back and got in. Then he went and made open the shutters in front and walk out and through the door before the very eyes of the police. When he have an auction in that house, he advertised it and put up big notice. And when the day come, he sell off by a great auctioneer all the goods of that other man who owned them. Then he go to a builder and sell him that house, making an agreement that he pull it down and take all away within a certain time. And your police and other authority help him all they can. And when that owner come back from his holiday in Switzerland, he find only an empty hole where his house had been. This was all done en règle, and in our work we shall be en règle too. We shall not go so early that the policemen, who have then little to think of, shall deem it strange, but we shall go after 10 o'clock, when there are many about, and such things would be done were we indeed owners of the house. I could not but see how right he was, and the terrible despair of Mina's face became relaxed a thought. There was hope in such good counsel. Van Helsing went on. When once within that house, we may find more clues. At any rate, some of us can remain there, whilst the rest find the other places where there be more earth boxes, at Bermondsey and Mile End. Lord Godalming stood up. I can be of some use here. I shall wire to my people to have horses and carriages where they will be most convenient. Look here, old fellow, said Morris. It is a capital idea to have all ready in case we want to go horsebacking. But don't you think that one of your snappy carriages with its heraldic adornments in a byway of Walworth or Mile End would attract too much attention for our purposes? It seems to me that we ought to take cabs when we go south or east, and even leave them somewhere near the neighborhood we are going to. Friend Quincy is right, said the professor. His head is what you call in plane with the horizon. It is a difficult thing that we go to do, and we do not want no peoples to watch us if so it may. That. Mina took a growing interest in everything, and I was rejoiced to see the exigency of affairs was helping her to forget for a time the terrible experience of the night. She was very, very pale, almost ghastly, and so thin that her lips were drawn away, showing her teeth in somewhat of prominence. I did not mention this last, lest it should give her needless pain, but it made my blood run cold in my veins to think of what had occurred with poor Lucy when the Count had sucked her blood. As yet there was no sign of the teeth growing sharper, but time as yet was short, and there was time for fear. When we came to the discussion of the sequence of our efforts and the disposition of our forces, there were new sources of doubt. It was finally agreed that before starting for Piccadilly, we should destroy the Count's lair close at hand. In case he should find it out too soon, we should thus be still ahead of him in our work of destruction, and his presence in his purely material shape, and at his weakest, might give us some new clue. As to the disposal of forces, it was suggested by the professor after our visit to Carfax, we should all enter the house in Piccadilly, that the two doctors and I should remain there, whilst Lord Godalming and Quincy found the lairs at Walworth and Mile End and destroyed them. It was possible, if not likely, the professor urged, that the Count might appear in Piccadilly during the day, and that if so, we might be able to cope with him then and there. At any rate, we might be able to follow him in force. To this plan I strenuously objected, and so far as my going was concerned, for I said that I intended to stay and protect Mina. I thought that my mind was made up on the subject, but Mina would not listen to my objection. She said that there might be some law matter in which I could be useful, that amongst the Count's papers might be some clue which I could understand out of my experience in Transylvania, and that, as it was, all the strength we could muster was required to cope with the Count's extraordinary power. I had to give in, for Mina's resolution was fixed. She said that it was the last hope for her that we should all work together. As for me, she said, I have no fear. Things have been as bad as they can be, and whatever may happen must have in it some element of hope or comfort. Go, my husband. God can, if he wishes it, guard me as well alone as with any one present. So I started up crying out, Then in God's name let us come at once, for we are losing time. The Count may come to Piccadilly earlier than we think. Not so, said Van Helsing, holding up his hand. But why? I asked. Do you forget, he said, with actually a smile, that last night he banqueted heavily and will sleep late? Did I forget? Shall I ever? Can I ever? Can any of us ever forget that terrible scene? Mina struggled hard to keep her brave countenance, but the pain overmastered her, and she put her hands before her face and shuddered whilst she moaned. Van Helsing had not intended to recall her frightful experience. He had simply lost sight of her and her part in the affair in his intellectual effort. When it struck him what he said, he was horrified at his thoughtlessness and tried to comfort her. Oh, Madame Mina, he said. Dear, dear Madame Mina. Alas, that I of all who so reverence you should have said anything so forgetful. These stupid old lips of mine and this stupid old head do not deserve so. But you will forget it, will you not? He bent low beside her as he spoke. He took his hand and, looking at him through her tears, said hoarsely, No, I shall not forget. For it is well that I remember, and with it I have so much in memory of you that it is sweet that I shall take it altogether. Now, you must all be going soon. Breakfast is ready, and we must all eat that we may be strong. Breakfast was a strange meal to us all. We tried to be cheerful and encourage each other, and Mina was the brightest and most cheerful of us. When it was over, Van Helsing stood up and said, Now, my dear friends, we go forth to our terrible enterprise. Are we all armed, as we were on that night when we first visited our enemy's lair? Armed against ghostly as well as carnal attack? We all assured him. Then it is well. Now, Madame Mina, you are, in any case, quite safe here until the sunset, and before then we shall return. If we shall return. But before we go, let me see you armed against personal attack. I have myself, since you came down, prepared your chamber by the placing of things which we know, so that he may not enter. Now let me guard yourself. On your forehead I touch this piece of sacred wafer in the name of the Father, the Son, and there was a fearful scream which almost froze our hearts to hear. As he placed the wafer on Mina's forehead, it had seared it, had burned the flesh as though it had been a piece of white-hot metal. My poor darling's brain had told her the significance of the fact as quickly as her nerves received the pain of it, and the two so overwhelmed her that her overwrought nature had its voice in that dreadful scream. The words to her thought came quickly. The echo of the scream had not ceased to ring on the air when there came the reaction, and she sank to her knees on the floor in an agony of abasement, pulling her beautiful hair over her face as the leper of old his mantle. She wailed out, "Unclean, unclean! Even the Almighty shuns my polluted flesh. I must bear this mark of shame upon my forehead until the judgment day." They all paused. I had thrown myself beside her in an agony of helpless grief, and putting my arms around her, held her tight. For a few minutes our sorrowful hearts beat together, whilst the friends around us turned away their eyes that ran tears silently. Then Van Helsing turned and said gravely, so gravely that I could not help feeling that he was in some way inspired, and was stating things outside himself. It may be that you may have to bear that mark till God himself see fit, as he most surely shall, on his judgment day, to redress all wrongs of the earth and of his children that he has placed thereon. And oh, Madame Mina, my dear, may we who love you be there to see when that red scar, the sign of God's knowledge of what has been, shall pass away, and leave your forehead as pure as the heart we know. For so surely as we live, that scar shall pass away when God sees right to lift the burden that is hard upon us. Till then, we bear our cross, as his Son did in obedience to his will, that it may be we are chosen instruments of his good pleasure, and we ascend to his bidding as that other through stripes and shame. Right. Okay. Through tears and blood, through doubts and fears, and all that makes the difference between God and man. There was hope in his words, and comfort, and they made for resignation. Mina and I both felt so, and simultaneously we took each one of the old man's hands and bent over and kissed it. Then, without a word, we all knelt down together, and all holding hands, swore to be true to each other. We men pledged ourselves to raise the veil of sorrow from the head of her whom, each in its own way, we loved, and we prayed for help and guidance in the terrible task which lay before us. It was then time to start. So I said farewell to Mina, a parting which neither of us shall forget to our dying day, and we set out. To one thing I have made up my mind. If we find out that Mina must be a vampire in the end, and then she shall not go into that unknown and terrible land alone, I suppose it is thus that in old times one vampire meant many, just as their hideous bodies could only rest in sacred earth, so the holiest love that was recruiting sergeant for their ghostly ranks. We entered Carfax without trouble and found all things the same as on the first occasion. It was hard to believe that amongst so prosaic surroundings of neglect and dust and decay, there was any ground for such fear as already we knew. Had not our minds been made up, and had there not been terrible memories to spur us on, we could hardly have proceeded with our task. We found no papers or any signs of use in the house, and in the old chapel, that great boxes looked just as we had last seen them. Dr. Van Helsing said to us solemnly as we stood before them, "Now, my friends, we have a duty here to do. We must sterilize this earth so sacred of holy memories that he has brought from a far distant land for such fell use. He has chosen this earth because it has been holy. Thus we defeat him with his own weapon, for we make it more holy still. It was sanctified to such use of man. Now we sanctify it to God." He spoke as he spoke, he took from his bag a screwdriver and a wrench, and very soon the top of one of the cases was thrown open. The earth smelled musty and close, but we did not somehow seem to mind, for our attention was concentrated on the professor. Taking from his box a piece of the sacred wafer, he laid it reverently on the earth, and then, shutting down the lid, began to screw it home, we aiding him as he worked. One by one, we treated in the same way each of the great boxes, and left them as we had found them to all appearance, but in each was a portion of the host. When we closed the door behind us, the professor said solemnly, "So much is already done. If it may be that with all the others we can be so successful, then the sunset of this evening may shine upon Madame Mina's forehead, all white as ivory and with no stain." As we passed across the lawn on our way to the station to catch our train, we could see the front of the asylum. I looked eagerly, and in the window of my own room saw Mina. I waved my hand at her and nodded to tell that our work there was successfully accomplished. She nodded in reply to show that she understood. The last I saw, she was waving her hand in farewell. It was with a heavy heart that we sought the station and just caught the train, which was steaming in as we reached the platform. I have written this in the train. All right, I need some water. Isa, Piccadilly, 12:30 o'clock. Just before we reached Fenchurch Street, Lord Godalming said to me, "Quincy and I will find a locksmith. You had better not come with us in case there should be any difficulty. For under the circumstances, it wouldn't seem so bad for us to break into an empty house. But you are a solicitor, and the Incorporated Law Society might tell you that you should have known better." I demurred as to not my sharing any danger even of odium, but he went on. "Besides, it will attract less attention if there are not too many of us. My title will make it all right with a locksmith, and with any policeman that may come along. You had better go with Jack and the professor, and stay in the Green Park somewhere in sight of the house. And when you see the door opened and the smith has gone away, do you all come across. We shall be on the lookout for you, and shall let you in." Thank you, love. Right. Okay. "The advice is good," said Van Helsing. So we said no more. Godalming and Morris hurried off in a cab, we following in another. At the corner of Arlington Street, our contingent got out and strolled into the Green Park. My heart beat as I saw the house on which so much of our hope was centered, looming up grim and silent in its deserted condition amongst its more lively and spruce-looking neighbors. We sat down on a bench within good view, and began to smoke cigars so as to attract as little attention as possible. The minutes seemed to pass with leaden feet as we waited for the coming of the others. At length, we saw a four-wheeler drive up. Out of it, in leisurely fashion, got Lord Godalming and Morris, and down from the box descended a thick-set working-man with his rush-roven basket of tools. Morris paid the cabman, who touched his hat and drove away. Together, the two ascended the steps, and Lord Godalming pointed out what he wanted done. The workman took off his coat leisurely and hung it on one of the spikes of the rail, saying something to a policeman who had just then sauntered along. The policeman nodded acquiescence, and the man kneeling down placed his bag beside him. After searching through it, he took out a selection of tools, which he produced to lay beside him in orderly fashion. Then he stood up, looked into the keyhole, blew into it, and, turning to his employers, made some remark. Lord Godalming smiled, and the man lifted a good-sized bunch of keys. Selecting one of them, he began to probe the lock, as if feeling his way with it. After fumbling about for a bit, he tried a second, and then a third. All at once the door opened under a slight push from him, and he and the two others entered the hall. We sat still. My own cigar burnt furiously, but Van Helsing's went cold altogether. We waited patiently as we saw the workman come out and bring in his bag. Then he held the door partly open, steadying it with his knees, whilst he fitted a key into the lock. Then he finally handed to Lord Godalming, who took out his purse and gave him something. The man touched his hat, took his bag, put on his coat, and departed. Not a soul took the slightest notice of the whole transaction. When the man had fairly gone, we three crossed the street and knocked at the door. It was immediately opened by Quincy Morris, beside whom stood Lord Godalming lighting a cigar. "The place smells so vilely," said the latter, as we came in. It did indeed smell vilely. That, like the old chapel at Carfax, and with our previous experience, it was plain to us that the Count had been using the place pretty freely. We moved to explore the house, all keeping together in case of attack, for we knew we had a strong and wily enemy to deal with, and as yet we did not know whether the Count might not be in the house. In the dining room, which lay at the back of the hall, we found 8 boxes of earth. 8 boxes only out of the 9 which we sought. Our work was not over, and would never be until we should have found the missing box. First we opened the shutters of the window, which looked out across a narrow stone-flagged yard at the blank face of a stable, pointed to look like the front of a miniature house. There were no windows in it, so we were not afraid of being overlooked. We did not lose any time in examining the chests. With the tools which we had brought with us, we opened them, one by one, and treated them as we had treated those others in the old chapel. It was evident to us that the Count was not at present in the house, and we proceeded to search for any of his effects. After a cursory glance at the rest of the rooms, from basement to attic, we came to the conclusion that the dining room contained any effects which might belong to the Count, and so we proceeded to minutely examine them. They lay in a sort of orderly disorder on the great dining room table. There were title deeds of the Piccadilly house in great bundle, deeds of the purchase of the houses at Mile and Bermondsey, notepaper, envelopes, and pen and ink. They were all covered up in thin wrapping paper to keep them from the dust. There were also a clothes brush, a brush and a comb, and a jug and basin, the latter containing dirty water which was reddened as if with blood. Last of all was a little heap of keys of all sorts and sizes, probably those belonging to the other houses. When we had examined this last find, Lord Godalming and Quincy Morris, taking accurate notes of the various addresses of the house in the east and the south, took with them the keys in a great bunch and set out to destroy the boxes in these places. The rest of us are, with what patience we can, waiting their return, or the coming of the Count. Oh,
You all right there?
that's a lot of talking.
A lot of
A
talking.
That's more
lot of
talking than
talking.
I've done in a long time. I'm too sober for this.
Oh no, don't, honey, no.
I couldn't help but notice your laughter during that sequence with Van Helsing talking about
Yes, I
Mina's
did. I
experience.
did like that. That was a great parable. I like that parable.
You know, now I can't get it out of my mind just imagining that this is how Jonathan Harker always talks. You try to have a conversation with him and it just turns into an immediate, like, 5-hour journal page of dialogue.
Yep.
Also, he wrote all that on the train. How fast does this man write?
Listen, I imagine he wrote it in shorthand and it was later
Oh god, yes.
transcribed.
Shorthand, you could write this much.
How long of a train was he taking?
It doesn't. You can write a lot with shorthand. It doesn't matter how long it is. You could write a ton of pages with shorthand.
I mean,
Speaking of a ton of pages, just out of curiosity, how far are we thinking of going today?
How many chapters do we have left?
We are at 23, and in total, there were what, 27.
If we read chapter 23, that's 3 today and 3 next time.
mm-hmm.
4 next time, because of 24,
Wait.
25, 26, and 27.
Oh,
Well, we have a hard deadline of movie night. And it's in Crusader Corrupted's channel. I mean,
server.
server. And that is in 2.5 hours. So
2.5 hours? Yeah.
one more, possibly 2 more,
Mm-hmm.
I think.
All right, just making sure. We ready to proceed?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Chapter 23. Dr. Seward's Diary. 3rd of October. The time seemed terribly long whilst we were waiting for the coming of Godalming and Quincy Morris. The professor tried to keep our minds active by using them all the time. I could see his beneficent purpose by the side glances which he threw from time to time at Harker. The poor fellow is overwhelmed in a misery that is appalling to see. Last night he was a frank, happy-looking man, with strong, youthful face full of energy, and with dark brown hair. Today he is a drawn, haggard old man whose white hair matches well with the hollow, burning eyes and grief-written lines of his face. His energy is still intact. In fact, he is like a living flame. This may yet be his salvation, for if all goes well, it will tide him over the despairing period. He will then, in a kind of way, wake again to the realities of life. Poor fellow, I thought my own trouble was bad enough, but his. The professor knows this well enough, and is doing his best to keep his mind active. What he has been saying was, under the circumstances, of absorbing interest. As well as I can remember, here it is. I have studied over and over again since they came into my hands all the papers relating to this monster. And the more I have studied, the greater seems the necessity to utterly stamp him out. All through there are signs of his advance, not only of his power, but of his knowledge of it. As I learned from the researches of my friend Arminius of Budapest, he was in life a most wonderful man, soldier, statesman, and alchemist, which latter was the highest development of the science knowledge of his time. He had a mighty brain, and a learning beyond compare, and a heart that knew no fear and no remorse. He dared even to attend the scholomance, and there was no branch of knowledge of his time that he did not essay. Well, in him the brain powers survived the physical death, though it would seem that memory was not all complete. In some faculties of mind he has been and is only a child, but he is growing, and some things that were childish at the first are now of man's stature. He is experimenting, and doing it well, and if it had not been that we have crossed his path, he would be yet, he may be yet if we fail, the father or furtherer of a new order of beings, whose road must lead through death, not life. Harker groaned and said, And this is all arrayed against my darling. But how is he experimenting? The knowledge may help us to defeat him. He has all along since his coming been trying his powers slowly but surely. That big child brain of his is working. Well for us, it is as yet a child brain. For had he dared, at the first, to attempt certain things, he would long ago have been beyond our power. However, he means to succeed, and the man who has centuries before him can afford to wait and to go slow. Festina lente may well be his motto. I fail to understand, said Harker wearily. Oh, do be more plain to me. Perhaps grief and trouble are dulling my brain. The professor laid his hand tenderly on his shoulder as he spoke. Ah, my child, I will be plain. Do you not see how, of late, this monster has been creeping into knowledge experimentally? How he has been making use of the Zoophagous patient to effect his entry into friend John's home? For your vampire, though in all afterwards he can come when and how he will, must at the first make entry only when asked thereto by an inmate. But these are not his most important experiments. Do we not see how at the first all these so great boxes were moved by others? He knew not then but that must be so. But all the time that so great child brain of his was growing, and he began to consider whether he might not himself move the box. So he began to help, and then when he found that this be all right, he tried to move them all alone. And so he progress, and he scatter these graves of him, and none but he know where they are hidden. He may have intended to bury them deep in the ground, so that only he use them in the night, or at such time as he can change his form, they do him equal well, and none may know these are his hiding place. But, my child, do not despair. This knowledge come to him just too late. Already all of his layers, but one, be sterilized as for him, and before the sunset this shall be so. Then he have no place where he can move and hide. I delayed this morning, that so we might be sure. Is there not more at stake for us than for him? Then why we not be even more careful than him? By my clock it is 1 hour, and already, if all be well, friend Arthur and Quincy are on their way to us. Today is our day, and we must go sure, if slow, and lose no chance. See, there are 5 of us when those absent ones return. Whilst we were speaking, we were startled by a knock at the hall door, the double postman's knock of the telegraph boy. We all moved out to the hall with one impulse, and Van Helsing, holding up his hand to us to keep silence, stepped to the door and opened it. The boy handed in a dispatch. The professor closed the door again, and after looking at the direction, opened it and read it aloud. Look out for D. He has just now 12:45 come from Carfax hurriedly and hastened towards the south. He seems to be going the round and may want to see you. Mina. There was a pause, broken by Jonathan Harker's voice. Now, God be thanked, we shall soon meet. Van Helsing turned to him quickly and said, God will act in his own way and time. Do not fear, and do not rejoice as yet, for what we wish for at the moment may be our undoings. I care for nothing now, he answered hotly, except to wipe out this brute from the face of creation. I will sell my soul to do it. Oh, hush, hush, my child, said Van Helsing. God does not purchase souls in this wise, and the devil, though he may purchase, does not keep faith. But God is merciful and just, and knows your pain and your devotion to that dear Madam Mina. Think you how her pain would be doubled, did she but hear your wild words? Do not fear any of us. We are all devoted to this cause, and today shall see the end. The time is coming for action. Today this vampire is limit to the powers of man, and till sunset he may not change. It will take him time to arrive here. See, it is 20 minutes past 1, and there are yet some times before he can hither come, but he never so quick. What we must hope for is that my Lord Arthur and Quincy arrive first. About half an hour after we had received Mrs. Harker's telegram, there came a quiet, resolute knock at the hall door. It was just an ordinary knock, such as is given hourly by thousands of gentlemen, but it made the professor's heart and mine beat loudly. We looked at each other and together moved out into the hall. We each held ready to us our various armaments, the spiritual in the left hand, the mortal in the right. Van Helsing pulled back the latch and, holding the door half open, stood back, having both hands ready for action. The gladness of our hearts must have shone upon our faces when, on the step close to the door, we saw Lord Godalming and Quincy Morris. They came quickly in and closed the door behind them, the former saying as they moved along the hall, "It is all right. We found both places, 6 boxes in each, and we destroyed them all." "Destroyed?" asked the professor. "For him." We were silent for a minute, and then Quincy said, "There's nothing to do but to wait here. If, however, he doesn't turn up by 5 o'clock, we must start off, for it won't do to leave Mrs. Harker alone after sunset." "He will be here before long now," said Van Helsing, who had been consulting his pocketbook. "Nota bene, in Madame's telegram he went south from Carfax. That means he went to cross the river, and he could only do so at slack of tide, which should be something before 1 o'clock. That he went south has a meaning for us. He is as yet only suspicious, and he went from Carfax first to the place where he would suspect interference least. You must have been at Bermondsey only a short time before him. That he is not here already shows that he went to Mile End next. This took him some time, for he would then have to be carried over the river in some way. Believe me, my friends, we shall not have long to wait now. We should have ready some plan of attack, so that we may throw away no chance. Hush, there is no time now. Have all your arms, be ready." He held up a warning hand as he spoke, for we all could hear a key softly inserted into the lock of the hall door. I could not but admire, even at such a moment, the way in which a dominant spirit asserted itself. In all our hunting parties and adventures in different parts of the world, Quincy Morris had always been the one to arrange the plan of action, and Arthur and I had been accustomed to obey him implicitly. Now the old habit seemed to be renewed instinctively. With a swift glance round the room, he at once laid out our plan of attack, and without speaking a word, with a gesture, placed us each in position. Van Helsing, Harker, and I were just behind the door, so that when it was opened the professor could guard it, whilst we two stepped between the incomer and the door. Godalming behind and Quincy in front stood just out of sight, ready to move in front of the window. We waited in a suspense that made the seconds pass with nightmare slowness. The slow, careful steps came along the hall. The Count was evidently prepared for some surprise. At least he feared it. Suddenly, with a single bound, he leaped into the room, winning a way past us before any of us could raise a hand to stay him. There was something so panther-like in the movement, something so unhuman that it seemed to sober us all from the shock of his coming. The first to act was Harker, who, with a quick movement, threw himself before the door leading into the room in the front of the house. As the Count saw us, a horrible sort of snarl passed over his face, showing the eye-teeth long and pointed. The evil smile as quickly passed into a cold stare of lion-like disdain. His expression again changed, as with a single impulse, we all advanced upon him. It was a pity that we had not some better organized plan of attack, for even at the moment I wondered what we were to do. I did not myself know whether our lethal weapons would avail us anything. Harker evidently meant to try the matter, for he had ready his great kukri knife, and made a fierce and sudden cut at him. The blow was a powerful one. Only the diabolical quickness of the Count's leap back saved him. A second less, and the trenchant blade had shorn through his heart. As it was, the point just cut the cloth of his coat, making a wide gap whence a bundle of banknotes and a stream of gold fell out. The expression of the Count's face was so hellish that for a moment I feared for Harker, though I saw him throw the terrible knife aloft again for another stroke. Instinctively I moved forward with a protective impulse, holding the crucifix and wafer in my hand. I felt a mighty power fly along my arm, and it was without surprise that I saw the monster cower back before a similar movement made spontaneously by each one of us. It would be impossible to describe the expression of hate and baffled malignity, of anger and hellish rage which came over the Count's face. His waxen hue became greenish yellow by the contrast of his burning eyes, and the red scar on the forehead showed on the pallid skin like a palpitating wound. The next instant, with a sinuous dive, he swept under Harker's arm ere his blow could fall, and, grasping a handful of the money from the floor, dashed across the room and threw himself at the window. Amid the crash and glitter of the falling glass, he tumbled into the flagged area below. Though the sound of the shivering glass I could hear the ting of the gold as some of the sovereigns fell on the flagging. We ran over and saw him spring unhurt from the ground. He rushing up the steps, crossed the flagged yard, and pushed open the stable door. There he turned and spoke to us. You think to baffle me, you, with your pale faces all in a row like sheep in a butcher's. You shall be sorry yet, each one of you. You think you have let me without a place to rest, but I have more. My revenge is just begun. I spread it over centuries, and time is on my side. Your girls that you all love are mine already, and through them you and others shall yet be mine. My creatures, to do my bidding and to be my jackals when I want to feed. Ah! With a contemptuous sneer, he passed quickly through the door, and we heard the rusty bolt creak as he fastened it behind him. A door beyond opened and shut. The first of us to speak was the professor, as, realizing the difficulty of following him through the stable, we moved towards the hall. We have learnt something, much. Notwithstanding his brave words, he fears us. He fear time, he fear want. For if not, why he hurry so? His very tone betray him, or my ears deceive. Why take that money? You follow quick. You are hunters of wild beasts and understand it so. For me, I make sure that nothing here may be of use to him, if so that he return. As he spoke, he put the money remaining into his pocket, took the title deeds and the bundle as Harker had left them, and swept the remaining things into the open fireplace, where he set fire to them with a match. Godalming and Morris had rushed out into the yard, and Harker had lowered himself from the window to follow the Count. He had, however, bolted the stable door, and by the time they had forced it open, there was no sign of him. Van Helsing and I tried to make inquiry at the back of the house, but the mews was deserted, and no one had seen him depart. It was now late in the afternoon, and sunset was not far off. We had to recognize that our game was up. With heavy hearts, we agreed with the professor when he said, "Let us go back to Madam Mina. Poor, poor dear Madam Mina. All we can do just now is done, and we can there at least protect her. But we need not despair. There is but one more earth box, and we must try to find it. When that is done, all may yet be well." I could see that he spoke as bravely as he could to comfort Harker. The poor fellow was quite broken down. Now and again he gave a low groan, which he could not suppress. He was thinking of his wife. With sad hearts we came back to my house, where we found Mrs. Harker awaiting us, with an appearance of cheerfulness which did honor to her bravery and unselfishness. When she saw our faces, her own became as pale as death. For a second or two her eyes were closed as if she were in secret prayer. And then she said cheerfully, "I can never thank you all enough. Oh, my poor darling." As she spoke, she took her husband's gray head in her hands and kissed it. "Lay your poor head here and rest it. All will yet be well, dear. God will protect us if he so will it in his good intent." The poor fellow only groaned. There was no place for words in his sublime misery. We had a sort of perfunctory supper together, and I think it cheered us all up somewhat. It was perhaps the mere animal heat of food to hungry people, for none of us had eaten anything since breakfast, or the sense of companionship may have helped us, But anyhow, we were all less miserable, and saw the morrow as not altogether without hope. True to our promise, we told Mrs. Harker everything which had passed, and although she grew snowy white at times, when danger had seemed to threaten her husband, and red at others, when his devotion to her was manifested, she listened bravely and with calmness. When we came to the part where Harker had rushed at the Count so recklessly, she clung to her husband's arm, and held it tight as though her clinging could protect him from any harm that might come. She said nothing, however, till the narration was all done, and matters had been brought up to the present time. Then, without letting go her husband's hand, she stood up amongst us and spoke. Oh, that I could give any idea of the scene, of that sweet, sweet, good woman, in all the radiant beauty of her youth and animation, with the red scar on her forehead of which she was conscious, and which we saw with grinding of our teeth, remembering whence and how it came, her loving kindness against our grim hate, her tender faith against all our fears and doubting. And we, knowing that, so far as symbols went, she, with all her goodness and purity and faith, was outcast from God. Jonathan, she said, and the word sounded like music on her lips. It was so full of love and tenderness. Jonathan, dear, and you all my true, true friends, I want you to bear something in mind through all this dreadful time. I know that you must fight, that you must destroy even as you destroyed the false Lucy, so that the true Lucy might live hereafter. But it is not a work of hate. That poor soul who has wrought all this misery is the saddest case of all. Just think what will be his joy when he too is destroyed in his worser part, that his better part may have spiritual immortality. You must be pitiful to him too, though it may not hold your hands from his destruction. As she spoke, I could see her husband's face darken and draw together, as though the passion in him were shriveling his being to its core. Instinctively, the clasp on his wife's hand grew closer, till his knuckles looked white. She did not flinch from the pain which I knew she must have suffered, but looked at him with eyes that were more appealing than ever. As she stopped speaking, he leaped to his feet, almost tearing his hand from hers as he spoke. May God give him into my hand just for long enough to destroy that earthly life of him which we are aiming at. If beyond it I could send his soul for ever and ever to burning hell, I would do it. Oh, hush, hush. Oh, hush. In the name of the good God, don't say such things, Jonathan, my husband, or you will crush me with fear and horror. Just think, my dear, I have been thinking all this long, long day of it, that perhaps some day I too may need such pity, and that some other like you, and with equal cause for anger, may deny it to me. Oh, my husband, indeed, I would have spared you such a thought had there been another way, but I pray that God may not have treasured your wild words, except as the heartbroken wail of a very loving and sorely stricken man. O God, let these poor white hairs go in evidence of what he has suffered, who all his life has done no wrong, and unto whom so many sorrows have come. We men were all in tears now. There was no resisting them, and we wept openly. She wept too, to see that her sweeter counsels had prevailed. Her husband flung himself on his knees beside her, and putting his arms round her, hid his face in the folds of her dress. Van Helsing beckoned to us, and we stole out of the room, leaving the two loving hearts alone with God. Before they retired, the professor fixed up the room against any coming of the vampire, and assured Mrs. Harker that she might rest in peace. She tried to school herself to the belief, and manifestly for her husband's sake, tried to seem content. It was a brave struggle, and was, I think and believe, not without its reward. Van Helsing had placed at hand a bell which either of them was to sound in case of any emergency. When they had retired, Quincy, Godalming, and I arranged that we should sit up, dividing the night between us, and watch over the safety of the poor stricken lady. The first watch falls to Quincy, so the rest of us will be off to bed as soon as we can. Godalming has already turned in, for he is the second watch. Now that my work is done, I, too, shall go to bed.
Jonathan Harker's Journal. 3rd and 4th of October, close to midnight. I thought yesterday would never end. There was over me a yearning for sleep, and some sort of blind belief that to wake would be to find things changed, and that any change must now be for the better. Before we parted, we discussed what our next step was to be, but we could arrive at no result. All we knew was that one earth box remained, and that the Count alone knew where it was. If he chooses to lie hidden, he may baffle us for years, and in the meantime, the thought is too horrible. I dare not think of it even now. This I know, that if ever there was a woman who was all perfection, that one is my poor wronged darling. I love her 1,000 times more for her sweet pity of last night, a pity that made my own hate of the monster seem despicable. Surely God will not permit the world to be the poorer by the loss of such a creature. This is hope to me. We are all drifting reefwards now, and the faith is our only anchor. Thank God, Mina is sleeping, and sleeping without dreams. I fear what her dreams might be like, with such terrible memories to ground them in. She has not been so calm within my seeing since the sunset. Then, for a while, there came over her face a repose, which was like spring after the blasts of March. I thought at the time that it was the softness of the red sunset on her face, but somehow now I think it has a deeper meaning. I am not sleeping myself, though I am weary, weary to death. However, I must try to sleep, for there is tomorrow to think of, and there is no rest for me until later. I must have fallen asleep, for I was awaked by Mina, who was sitting up in bed with a startled look on her face. I could see easily, for we did not leave the room in darkness. She had placed a warning hand over my mouth, and now she whispered in my ear, "Hush, there is someone in the corridor." I got up softly, and, crossing the room, gently opened the door. Just outside, stretched on a mattress, lay Mr. Morris, wide awake. He raised a warning hand for silence as he whispered to me, "Hush, go back to bed. It is all right. One of us will be here all night. We don't mean to take any chances." His look and gesture forbade discussion, so I came back and told Mina. She sighed, and positively a shadow of a smile stole over her poor, pale face as she put her arms around me and softly, "Oh, thank God for good, brave men." With a sigh, she sank back again to sleep. I write this now as I am not sleepy, though I must try again. 4th of October, morning. Once again during the night, I was awakened by Mina. This time we had all had a good sleep, for the gray of the coming dawn was making the windows into sharp oblongs, and the gas flame was like a speck rather than a disk of light. She said to me hurriedly, "Go, call the professor. I want to see him at once." "Why?" I asked. "I have an idea. I suppose it must have been in the night and matured. I suppose it must have come in the night and matured without my knowing it. He must hypnotize me before the dawn, and when I shall be able to speak. Go, quick, dearest. The time is getting close." I went to the door. Dr. Seward was resting on the mattress, and seeing me, he sprang to his feet. "Is anything wrong?" he asked in alarm. "No," I replied, "but Mina wants to see Dr. Van Helsing at once." "I will go," he said, and hurried into the professor's room. In 2 or 3 minutes later, Van Helsing was in the room in his dressing gown, and Mr. Morris and Lord Godalming were with Dr. Seward at the door asking questions. When the professor saw Mina, a positive smile, ousted the anxiety of his face. He rubbed his hands as he said, "Oh, my dear Madam Mina, this is indeed a change. See, friend Jonathan, we have got our dear Madam Mina, as of old, back to us today." Then, turning to her, he said cheerfully, And what am I to do for you? For at this hour you do not want me for nothing. I want you to hypnotize me, she said. Do it before the dawn, for I feel that then I can speak, and speak freely. Be quick, for time is short. Without a word, he motioned her to sit up in bed. Looking fixedly at her, he commenced to make passes in front of her, from over the top of her head downward, with each hand in turn. Mina gazed at him fixedly for a few minutes, during which my own heart beat like a trip hammer, for I felt that some crisis was at hand. Gradually, her eyes closed, and she sat, stock still. Only by the gentle heaving of her bosom could one know that she was alive. The professor made a few more passes, and then stopped, and I could see that his forehead was covered with great beads of perspiration. Mina opened her eyes, but she did not seem the same woman. There was a faraway look in her eyes, and her voice had a sad dreaminess which was new to me. Raising his hand to impose silence, the professor motioned to me to bring the others in. They came on tiptoe, closing the door behind them, and stood at the foot of the bed, looking on. Mina appeared not to see them. The stillness was broken by Van Helsing's voice, speaking in a low, level tone which would not break the current of her thoughts. Where are you? The answer came in a neutral way. I do not know. Sleep has no place it can call its own. For several minutes there was silence. Mina sat rigid, and the professor stood staring at her fixedly. The rest of us dared to breathe. The room was growing lighter. Without taking his eyes from Mina's face, Dr. Van Helsing motioned to me to pull up the blind. I did so, and the day seemed just upon us. A red streak shot up, and a rosy light seemed to diffuse itself through the room. On the instant, the professor spoke again. Where are you now? The answer came dreamily, but with intention. It were as though she were interpreting something. I have heard her use the same tone when reading her shorthand notes. I do not know. It is all strange to me. What do you see? I can see nothing. It is dark. What do you hear? I could detect the strain in the professor's patient voice. The lapping of water. It is gurgling by, and little waves leap. I can hear them on the outside. Then you are on a ship? We all looked at each other, trying to glean something from the other. We were afraid to think. The answer came quick. Oh, yes. What else do you hear? The sound of men stamping overhead as they run about. There is the creaking of a chain and the loud tinkle as the check of the capstan falls into the ratchet. What are you doing? I'm still. Oh, so still. It is like death. The voice faded away into a deep breath as of one sleeping, and the open eyes closed again. By this time, the sun had risen, and we were all in the full light of the day. Dr. Van Helsing placed his hands on Mina's shoulders and laid her down softly on her pillow. She lay like a sleeping child for a few moments, and then, with a long sigh, awoke and stared in wonder to see all around her. Have I been talking in my sleep? Was all she said. She seemed, however, to know the situation without telling, though she was eager to know what she had told. The professor repeated the conversation, and she said, Then there is not a moment to lose. It may not be yet too late. Mr. Morris and Lord Godalming started for the door, but the professor's calm voice called them back. Stay, my friends. That ship, wherever it was weighing anchor whilst she spoke. There are many ships weighing anchor at the moment in your so great port of London. Which of them is it that you seek? God be thanked that we have once again a clue, though whither it may lead us we know not. We have been blind somewhat, blind after the manner of men, since when we can look back we see that we might have seen looking forward, if we had been able to see what we might have seen. Alas, but the sentence is a puddle, is it not? We can now know what was in the Count's mind when he seized that money, though Jonathan's so fierce knife put him in the danger that even he dread. He meant escape. Hear me, escape. He saw that, with but one earth box left, and a pack of men following like dogs after a fox, this London was no place for him. He have take his last earth box on board a ship and leave the land. He think to escape, but no, we follow him. Tally ho, as our friend Arthur would say when he put on his red frock. Our old fox is wily, oh, so wily, and we must follow with wile. I, too, am wily, and I think his mind in a little while. In meantime, we may rest in peace, for there are waters between us which he do not want to pass, and which he could not if he would, unless the ship were to touch the land, and then only at full or slack tide. See, and the sun is just rose, and all day is sunset. All day to sunset is to us. Let us take bath and dress, and have breakfast, which we all need, and which we can eat comfortably, since he be not in the same land with us. Mina looked at him appealingly as she asked, "But why need we seek him further when he is gone away from us?" He took her hand and patted it as he replied, "Ask me nothings as yet. We have breakfast, then I answer all questions." He would say no more, and we separated to dress. After breakfast, Mina repeated her question. He looked at her gravely for a minute and then said sorrowfully, "Because, my dear Madam Mina, now, now more than ever must we find him, even if we have to follow him to the jaws of hell." She grew paler as she asked faintly, "Why?" "Because," he answered solemnly, "he can live for centuries, and you are but mortal woman. Time is now to be dreaded, since once he put that mark on your throat." I was just in time to catch her as she fell forward in a faint.
Well,
So begins the final chase.
let's save those parts for the final stream where we will wrap up this wonderful book.
Especially because the next chapter actually opens with Matsu reading.
Mm-hmm.
What?
We want to make sure in the last stream that everyone gets a reading part, and everyone will.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
you're reading the phonograph at the beginning of the next
Yes,
chapter,
I am.
Matsu.
I am. Yes, I am.
And then a part later on. But
Yes. Yes.
There we go.
Anyways, any thoughts on today's reading?
I designate time first to the person inexperienced to this book first, Ike.
Ike, any thoughts of what's happened so far?
It's good. It's good. Okay, I'll leave
I'll
it
take
there.
it.
Did anything shock or surprise you?
The part I laughed at. I'm so happy that Mina isn't dead and that they're not completely oblivious,
Hmm.
because that's one of the things I actually really hate is when just lack of communication is my biggest is the thing that can make me hate something the fastest.
Oh, you mean like in a film where the plot could be solved if everyone actually listened to everyone else?
AKA most
Yes.
romantic comedies.
Oh, I hate that.
Yeah.
I couldn't help but have a little giggle to myself when the boyfriend squad all came home and Mina was like, "Oh, my husband, rest your head here," and then I just imagined her pulling his head down into her boobs, like, there, rest, you poor, poor Ingrid. Him just groaning like, "Urgh." Meanwhile, everyone else is just like, "Why are you groaning? You're in the best spot in the house."
I now want to see that as an animation.
Poor guy's like beside himself in like anger, grief, hatred, and then just here.
Oh, come here, darling. Just head between boobs. Very
Take a
warm,
chill
very
pill for
comfy.
a second.
Here, this will make you feel better.
God is with you.
uh, honestly, I could say a lot, but honestly, it's mostly just talking about little bits I like. I've, as
Yeah.
I've said before, I've actually listened to the entirety of the audiobook of an audiobook for this book about 3 times now between when we started reading this and now. I listened to this book. I listened to the audiobook like once every like couple months, or sometimes multiple times in a row. It's just really good.
Though it's actually surprising to me that not too much other vampire fiction plays off of the whole like sidekick connection between victim and vampire. Like that is something that is not necessarily played upon too often, and I think it's a neglected piece of the lore actually. I think it's something that could lead to some very interesting like plot points or areas of stories.
Mm-hmm. I
Hmm.
I actually do know of one thing who kind of it's not quite that, but I don't remember its name, but it's basically it's all about this one this it's all about this one person who is in the same situation as Mina, and it's kind of a in the same situation as Mina, but it's more like a buddy cop adventure to try and save the one person. I can't remember its name for the life of me.
Hmm.
Also, how did people picture that confrontation in the house? Like, in terms of how the Count acted. They call his movement panther like, but that automatically springs to mind images of him on, like, all fours.
I don't
Like,
really see him
Smooth,
in all. Yeah,
just like
slow
incredibly
moving.
smooth moving.
I kind of imagine him very deliberate in his movements. Like it's
Okay,
very
um,
holding in sort of thing. Yep.
okay, you I know you are a fan of housing
yes.
the anime. You know how like in certain scenes like Alucard moves by just like basically like kick jumping, like he just kicks and jumps backwards, and it's like this like graceful little leap.
Like, this jaunting kind of, like, just...
I
Yeah,
suppose
I know what you're
grateful's a
talking about.
better way to put it,
Like
or
like that.
graceful, yeah.
Yeah, like I kind of imagine him like that a little bit, like with his jumping back, just like ooh.
I want... Man. They called it panther-like and quick, but at the same time, there would be something so cinematic about... Yeah, because you've seen the way Alucard like walks into a
Mhm.
room filled with
Mm-hmm.
enemies, like just that
Yes.
kind of saunter
Yes.
into a space filled with Dracula walking into a space like that filled with his enemies, just like expecting something to be there, but not necessarily being threatened by it.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
But that would also contrast very much with his reaction to like the host and the crucifix and things like that, and his absolute desperation to get away from it after the fact.
Mhm. Honestly, it's been a while since I've last like watched Hellsing. It's a good anime.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
we need to do that then.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I've got
Obviously, we watch
man.
Ultimate, not the older one. That they did things with. We don't talk about it.
I actually just rewatched the older one. It's not
The
terrible.
other one was okay. I mean, it wasn't bad. It was okay.
It just was non-canon. That's about it.
Yeah, it was okay. I mean, I'm very well aware of why they did that, but it was okay for the time.
I don't necessarily appreciate the main antagonist being a like pagan vampire from the quote unquote dark continent,
Yep.
which is
Yeah.
which is basically them kind of punching down at a colonized
Yeah.
territory. So
Yeah.
not the
I
best idea.
I did not really appreciate. I did not really enjoy the original, but I do greatly love Ultimate. It
Now,
also its art style, just the amount of detail they went into with Ultimate.
oh yeah.
Wow,
It being an
chef's
OVA
kiss.
versus an anime, yes.
Yep, the OVA is so good, so beautiful.
Though I will say, if they had actually, brought in some actual vampire myth from Africa, that would have been interesting.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
but no one ever does research that deep nowadays.
No, of course not.
I mean,
But it does.
I know there is like one or two. Like you name a continent and they have a vampire myth there.
Oh yeah, every continent has a vampire or mythos somewhere in some manner.
Mm-hmm.
That's true, Firefly. Dracula did have a long time to perfect his movements.
He just spent well. I was gonna say he spent all his time in front of a mirror practicing, but he probably couldn't see his reflection, so he'd have to guess.
Alright. Wait, now here's the real question. If vampires can't be seen in the mirror, does that also apply to their clothing?
They can only guess what they're putting on in the morning or the evening.
I mean, I
Like-
suppose you can look down at yourself and see how you look, but you
Like,
I
What
don't
would you
know.
do
No,
about your hair,
you
though?
can't. It's just normal clothes.
How would you know about
can't-
your hair, though?
You wouldn't.
You would have to guess.
listen, that's part of being turned into a vampire. Your hair is automatically, constantly fabulous. It's part of the vampire transformation. Listen, it's called pretty power. You're not allowed to be unglamorous.
Yeah, usually in the movies, there's nothing in the mirror at all. That's true, Firefly.
Mm-hmm. Although I have
No,
seen some where it's like, oh, it just can't see them, but you can see their clothes. I see that a lot in artwork, and it's silly.
I suppose if you have some kind of servant or familiar available to you, they can tell you how it looks, or
Mhm.
That's what thralls are for.
yeah,
Exactly. uh,
So you plan to spread your vile creatures throughout the earth? What? No, I just need someone to do my hair. I can't see it myself.
See, that's such a good idea. I love that. That's awesome.
taking
Honestly-
notes for the vampire book I'm working on. Do.
Honestly, I think that I don't know if that was a point in What We Do in the Shadows. I think it might have been. I
I
don't
think there
remember.
was a joke about it. I
Oh,
think there
yeah.
was a joke about that.
There has to be.
Yeah, I think there was a joke about fashion sense and how they can't actually see themselves in the mirror. Yeah, you would have to constantly have someone telling you. But then again, that invites the problem, if you ask this person, well, do I look good? If this person
Okay.
really, really hates your guts,
If a vampire puts on makeup, can they see the makeup in the mirror?
that's a
My-
good point.
My
Valid
brain is
question.
going somewhere totally NSFW.
Of course it is. It's you, love. What?
The
Not
Anne Rice
nearly as bad
vampires
as me.
specifically choose beautiful people to become vampires. Interesting, Firefly.
That is interesting. Though most vampires
I
in
mean-
folklore were not pretty people. They really weren't.
Yeah. That's just a
They were
modern
trying not
invention
to
of it.
romanticize vampires.
Like, back then, honestly, what led to vampires being romanticized is probably this book. and
Mhm.
one of my favorites, Carmilla.
Yeah, it
Mhm.
was
Yes,
it was
yes,
3
funny.
actually. It was
Hee hee,
Carmilla,
haha.
it was this book, and it was The Vampire by Polidori. That
Don't think
really
that isn't that the one where it's like like he fakes it, like the vampire fakes his death, and then
No,
he's
he
like,
doesn't
"Oh,
fake his
you owe me a
death.
thing."
He doesn't fake his death. He does die. He but in does anyone want spoilers? Does anyone care about spoilers?
Isn't like
I
that
don't
the
care.
one
Go
where
for
he
it.
like marries the guy's sister and he's not able to
Oh
say
yeah.
anything because of an oath? That one I did not
Yes.
get any of the. It just made the vampire out to be a scumbag. It didn't give him like
Well,
any
that's the
like
point.
character.
He's a scumbag. He's a real scumbag. He used. Oh, the opera goes even deeper into that. Yes, there is
There's
an
an
opera.
opera.
There's 2 operas.
Okay, I gotta see those. I
Vampire
have read
opera.
that one.
Yeah, there's 2 operas of the vampire.
Boys,
There was one I think recently done where they actually filmed it in Italy and did the entire opera
did
like
they have the
across the
part?
city.
Oh,
Today's a great day.
anyways, anyone have it? I think there's also a musical of Interview with the Vampire. That is one I have been told I need to read. Interview with the Vampire.
I have never read any of Anne Rice's stuff.
Me either.
Anyway.
Which, judging from it, is something that I need to rectify. I have another general question, but I think it can wait till at the end of the book because it's just a generalized question.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I
If
don't
I
really have
remember it, I hope I
much
remember it.
else to talk about right now. So, does anyone else have something they want to talk about before we fade on out? It doesn't even have to be pertaining to the book at this point. Like anything you want to shout out or say, or anything you have planned, all that jazz.
Only that I'm looking forward to reading the final chapters. I think that's going to be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah,
2
I'm doing
weeks
my
from now, you
Mm-hmm.
think?
I think so. Oh, is that 2 weeks Sunday? I cannot I cannot make it that Sunday.
Oh,
1 month from now.
Sorry. I'm sorry. Matsu has to go to a festival.
oh yeah, you have fun with that.
Yeah, I'm gonna be gone and all for most of the day.
Mhm.
It's the only way you get it.
We'll figure out when to do this next.
Okay.
And with that, I think I know who I'm going to lead out to.
Who's online? Who we going to?
Oh,
I don't think I've rated them before. But they're
Lilith?
playing Dead
Oh,
by Daylight. So,
hell yeah!
it's a fun game to watch. Anyways,
tragic. You know,
chat,
at least it's not League.
yep, chat, thank you for coming and listening to us read this book together. Have a wonderful night.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
See you next time.